The author has differing views from Bregman regarding. Option 1 states the role of agriculture in the advancement of knowledge. This is incorrect. We can do this just by the connotation. We see agriculture is not presented in a positive light. The role of agriculture in advancement of knowledge, this is not a point of discussion. In any case, the role of agriculture in advancement of knowledge is not something which is discussed at all. So we can clearly eliminate option 1. Option 2 states the property a propertyless mode of living being socially harmonious. Again, this is a bit of an assumption. We can see this reference here. It's one thing to maintain friendly relations and a propertyless mode of living when you are 30 or 40 hunter gatherers following the food, but life becomes a great deal more complex and knowledge far more extensive when there are settlements of many thousands. So it's not necessary that this has been presented as a very good scenario or an actually harmonious society. This is said that this is easier comparatively, but that becomes more difficult. Not necessarily that means that it is harmonious. So 2 is a bit of an exaggeration. We can eliminate option 2. Option 3 states a civilized society being coercive and unjust. This is actually correct. We can infer this where the author has differing views from Bregman. Now, we can see from the first paragraph that uh, we are presented with Thomas Hobbes's uh, view. This was how the 17th century philosopher Thomas Hobbes conceived our natural state to be, believing that all that stood between us and violent anarchy was a strong state and firm leadership. Bregman then also looks at, or he instead puts his faith in, Jean Jacques Rousseau, the 18th century French thinker who famously declared that man was born free and was civilization with its coercive powers, social classes, and restrictive laws that put him in chains. In the third paragraph, it is stated that he, spoken of Bregman, he takes Rousseau's intuition and paints a picture of pre-lapsarian idyll in which for the better part of 300,000 years Homo sapiens lived a fulfilling life in harmony with nature. Then we discovered agriculture, and for the next 10,000 years it was all property, war, greed, and injustice. Hobbes and Rousseau are seen as the two poles of the human nature argument, and it is no surprise that Bregman strongly sides with the Frenchman that is Rousseau. And after all of this, after this triangle, this triad has been established, we can flit forward to the very last line of the passage where it is stated, but it seems equally misleading to offer the false choice of Rousseau and Hobbes when clearly humanity encompasses both. So this is where we find that the author has differing views from Bregman, because Bregman was given to the fact that civilized society is coercive and unjust, and society as such is the bane of civilized life, or happy and contented life. But here the author says that both Rousseau, in that Bregman believed that Rousseau was correct rather than Hobbes, but the author believes that both Rousseau and Hobbes got things correctly. They were both right, and their opinions are inherent in all of humanity. So this is where we get the strongest reference of there being a difference between the authors and Bregman's opinions. So 3 can be qualified as a valid answer. 4 says the role of pathogens in the spread of infectious diseases. This is silly. We can see here that it is mentioned. This may be true, but what Bregman never really seems to get to grips is that pathogens were not the only thing that grew with agriculture. So did the number of humans. So we don't have the analysis of the role of pathogens in the spread of infectious disease and whatnot, all this rubbish. So it's completely outside the premise. We do have a reference here that brought about infectious diseases such as measles, smallpox, tuberculosis, syphilis, malaria, cholera, and plague. nomadic lifestyle, abandoning our nomadic lifestyle, and then domesticating animals, says Bregman. But again, the role of the pathogens has not been discussed. So four can be eliminated. Thus, our answer is option three. According to the author, the main reason why Bregman contrasts life in pre-agricultural societies with agricultural societies is two. We can see the contrast being made here in the third paragraph. He takes Rousseau's intuition and paints a picture of a pre-lapsarian idyll in which, for the better part of 300,000 years, Homo sapiens lived a fulfilling life in harmony with nature. Then we discovered agriculture, and for the next 10,000 years, it was all property, war, greed, and injustice. So before it was pre-lapsarian idyll, beautiful word, pre-lapsarian, would take a long while to explain, but in basic, it refers to the biblical fall of mankind, as in before, lapsarian, the the lapse or the fall, the first and the most important fall of man, where Adam and Eve, so to say, ate the fruit of the forbidden tree, the fruit of the tree of knowledge. That pre-lapsarian idyll, um, idleness, beautiful, blissful life, that, and after the discovery of agriculture, it was all property, war, greed, and injustice. This is done in order to present the difference between certain opinions with Bregman. So let's check with the options and see where we can get from there. Bolster his argument that people are basically decent, but progress as we know it can make them selfish. This is perfect. This is very highly inferential, but we can infer it because we see here that Hobbes and Rousseau, this is the third paragraph again, are seen as the two poles of the human nature argument. And it's no surprise that Bregman strongly sides with the Frenchman, which is Rousseau. And the opinion of Rousseau is mentioned here in the second paragraph. The 18th century French thinker Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who famously declared that man was born free and was civilization with its coercive powers, social classes, and restrictive laws that put him in chains. So this is given because the author wants to support his argument that people are basically decent. It is progress as we know it that has made them selfish. And one of the best examples or the best indicators of progress is the discovery of agriculture. So one can be inferred from the passage. One is true. We can qualify it as a valid answer. Option 2 states, highlight the enormous impact that settled farming had on population growth. Now, this is not exactly why the author gives this example. We see here that this is mentioned definitely. It was abandoning our nomadic lifestyle and then domesticating animals, says Bregman, that brought about infectious disease such as measles, smallpox, etc. But what Bregman never really seems to get to grips with is that pathogens were not the only things that grew with agriculture. So did the number of humans. So there was an impact of agriculture on the population, on the growth of the population. But to think about it, if we think logically, does that give us a reason why the author makes this argument? Why the author says at all speaks about agriculture? Doesn't make sense. So because of this, why would he contrast life in pre-agricultural society with agricultural society? Now, one could say that this is part of the problem. Yes, but it is part of the problem. The better answer is in option one. It is inferential, but it is better. It's more comprehensive. So in comparison also, 2 is inferior. We can eliminate option 2. Option 3 states, advocate the promotion of less complex societies as a basis for greater security and prosperity. Again, this is an assumption which is not supported. We have seen a similar reference in a previous question. It is given here It is one thing to maintain friendly relations and property and a propertyless mode of living when you are 30 or 40 hunter gatherers following the food. But life becomes a great deal more complex and knowledge far more extensive when there are settlements of many thousands. This does not mean that any one type of society has greater prosperity or lesser prosperity. So 3 is an assumption. It's not supported by the passage. We can eliminate option 3. Option 4 states, make the argument that an environmentally conscious lifestyle is a more harmonious way of living. There's again a distortion in this option. We have already seen the reference, and paints a picture of prelapsarian idyll in which, for the better part of 300,000 years, Homo sapiens lived a fulfilling life in harmony with nature. Then we discovered agriculture. But that does not mean that we are talking about an environmentally conscious lifestyle. And that at all does not mean that it is a more harmonious way of living. So this is definitely incorrect, a clear distortion. We can eliminate option 4. Our answer is option 1. None of the following views is expressed in the passage except that. So this is an except type question, but it asks for a correct inference from the passage. Let's check with the options. 1 states, most people agree with Hobbes's pessimistic view of human nature as being intrinsically untrustworthy and selfish. This is this is true. We can see this from the first paragraph. It is stated here that by and large, according to Rutger Bregman, in his new book Humankind, we have a rather pessimistic view, not of ourselves exactly, but of everyone else. This is how the 17th century philosopher Thomas Hobbes conceived our natural state to be, believing that all that stood between us and violent anarchy was a strong state and firm leadership. So, in this was how we see that most people agree with, by and large, we have a rather pessimistic view. So most people agree with Hobbes and his view. So one can be qualified as a valid answer. Option 2 states, Bregman agrees with Hobbes that firm leadership is needed to ensure property rights and regular strife. Now, property rights and regular strife are very minor issues, if at all they are in the passage. We don't need to go that far. This is definitely incorrect. Bregman agrees with Hobbes. Wrong. Bregman, as we see here, agrees with, strongly sides with the Frenchman. The Frenchman is Rousseau, as established by the second paragraph. So this is incorrect. We can eliminate option 2. Option 3 states, the author of the review believes in the veneer theory of human nature. Believes in the veneer theory of the human nature is not directly confirmed. We can see it here in the 6th paragraph. It's the result of what the Dutch biologist Frans de Waal calls veneer theory. The idea that just below the surface, our bestial nature is waiting to break out. There's a great deal of reassuring human decency, and in any case, the fear of civilizational collapse, Bregman believes, is unfounded. So it is not directly stated that the author believes in the veneer theory. Rather, it is hinted that the author doesn't believe it. Bregman believes it is unfounded. It is a result of what De Waal called the veneer theory. So this is contradictory to the passage. We can eliminate option 3. Option 4 states, Hobbes and Rousseau disagreed on the fundamental nature of humans, but both believed in the need for a strong state. Now, we have seen the references quite a few times. We see Hobbes's view in the last few lines of the first paragraph. We see Rousseau's view in the last 2 lines of the second paragraph. And we can clearly see that this common thread, the need for a strong state, is a distortion. It doesn't exist. So we can clearly eliminate option 4. Our answer thus is option 1. According to the passage, the collapse of civilizations is viewed by Bregman as The reference to the collapse of civilizations is here in the fifth paragraph. What it states is civilization has become synonymous with peace and progress, and wilderness with war and decline, writes Bregman. In reality, for most of human existence, it was the other way around. Whereas traditional history depicts the collapse of civilizations as dark ages in which everything gets worse, modern scholars, he claims, see them more as a reprieve in which the enslaved gain their freedom and culture flourishes. Like much else in this book, the truth is probably somewhere between the two stated positions. So we can check with the options. Option one states a sign of regression in society's trajectory. Uh, According to Bregman, this is incorrect because Bregman doesn't see uh, the collapse of civilizations as a sign of regression. Again, we can do this by connotation itself. Collapse of civilizations, according to Bregman, is not a bad thing. This option makes it a bad thing, a sign of regression. Regression is a negative connotation word. So we don't need this at all. This is incorrect. We can eliminate option one. Easy enough. Option two states a time that enables changes in societies and cultures. This is perfect. This is exactly true. We can see it from this line see them more as a reprieve in which the enslaved gain their freedom, culture flourishes. So, time that enables changes in societies and cultures, in fact, changes for the better. So, this is true. Two can be qualified as a valid answer. Option three says, resulting from a breakdown in the veneer of human nature. The veneer theory is mentioned here. We can see that this has no direct connection with the reference that we are looking for. So this can be eliminated. It's outside the premise of the question. Option 4 states a temporary phase which can be rectified by social action. So temporary phase may be true, it may be inferred from the passage, but which can be rectified by social action. First, there's no such reference that there is any rectification of these phases possible, and that too by social action. Second, the connotation again is wrong. Rectified by social action almost paints it in a negative light, but according to Bregman, as we've seen in option 1, it is a positive thing, it's not a bad thing. So 4 also is incorrect. We can eliminate 4. Our answer is option 2. Which of the following statements about the negative effects of screen time is the author least likely to endorse? Option 1 states it increases human contact as it fills an isolation void. Now, while it fills an isolation void, it fills a crucial void, and there is isolation. Our culture of increasing isolation, it increases human contact is incorrect. We can see this from the fifth paragraph. And so human contact is rare. We can also see a reference to this in the first paragraph. Human contact is becoming a luxury good. So this is something which is definitely not true according to the passage, means this is something that the author is not likely to endorse, least likely to endorse. So one is a valid choice. We can qualify one as a valid answer. Option 2 states it is shown to have adverse effects on young children's learning. Young children's learning can be found here in the third paragraph. Screen exposure starts young, and children who spent more than 2 hours a day looking at a screen got lower scores on thinking and language tests, according to early results of a landmark study on brain development of more than 11,000 children that the National Institute of Health is supporting. Most disturbingly, the study is finding that brains of children who spend a lot of time on screens are different. For some kids, there is premature thinning of their cerebral cortex. So, this is true according to the passage. So, the author is likely to endorse this. So, it's not an answer for us. We can eliminate option 2. Option 3 states it is designed to be addictive. This can be inferred from these lines in the fifth paragraph. The But with screen time, there has been a concentrated effort on the part of Silicon Valley behemoths to confuse the public. The poor and the middle class are told that screens are good and important for them and their children. There are fleets of psychologists and neuroscientists on staff at big tech companies working to hook eyes and minds to the screen as fast as possible and for as long as possible. So it is designed to increasingly be more and more addictive. So this is also something that the author would agree with. Three can be eliminated. Option 4 says it can cause depression in viewers. A direct reference, we can see it here in the third paragraph. In adults, one study found an association between screen time and depression. So this is also true. We can eliminate option 4. Hence, our answer is option 1. The statement, the richer you are, the more you spend to be off screen, is supported by which other line from the passage? This is a bit of a different question. This is a different question where it asks you which reference supports this. So you have to check for all these extracts from the passage. Let's look at the options. One states, studies show that time on these advertisement support platforms is unhealthy. This is a somewhat close option. We can see here, as studies show that time on these advertisement support platforms is unhealthy, it all seems starts to seem déclassé, like drinking soda or smoking cigarettes, which wealthy people do less than poor people. The wealthy can afford to opt out of having their data and their attention sold as a product. The poor and the middle class don't have the same kind of resources to make that happen. Now, agreed, we have this reference: the richer you are, the more you can spend to be off screen here in the first paragraph. This seems like it is all right, but it's actually not. There is there isn't a direct connection. So what we have here, a supporting statement to that is here. The wealthy can afford to opt out of having their data and their attention sold as a product. The poor and the middle class don't have the same kind of resources to make that happen. We can even see it here: drinking soda or smoking cigarettes, which wealthy people do less than poor people, right? But the reference here is towards these being unhealthy. It all starts to seem déclassé. uh, all of this particular reference, it doesn't have a direct reference at all to rich and poor. It just barely says it's unhealthy. So this does not qualify the fact that the rich are spending more to be off screen. It's close in reference, as in actually close by location, but it doesn't give us a direct answer. The answer that we're looking for, that's not this. So we can eliminate option 1. Option 2 states screens are filling a crucial void. Screens are filling a crucial void is here. And again, we see that here it is not about, it's about a culture of increasing isolation. It's not about rich and the poor. This is true to all people. So this has been generally spoken. This is true for all. So again, this is not a valid answer. We can eliminate option 2. Option 3 states Gmail is the same Gmail and it's all free. This is very close to what we had in option 1. It's here. Gmail is the same Gmail and it's all free. There is something mass market and unappealing about it, and so on. So we realize that if we had eliminated option 1, the same way we can eliminate option 3. Option 3 is close, but it does not give us a direct answer. So 3 can be eliminated. Option 4 states how comfortable someone is with human engagement could become a new class marker. Notice the word or the phrase class marker. This we can see from the end of the fourth paragraph, which is here. So, as wealthy kids are growing up with less screen time, poor kids are growing up with more. How comfortable someone is with human engagement could become a new class marker. We realize that this is where we do have an aspect of class, as in richer and poorer. We have a difference between wealthy kids and poor kids in the kind of screen time that they have. So, this is a valid reference. This connects with the question, and thus it gives us a valid answer. So, we can qualify 4. Our answer is option 4. The author claims that Silicon Valley tech companies have tried to confuse the public by the reference to this is in the fifth paragraph. We can see it here. But with screen time, there has been a concerted effort on the part of Silicon Valley behemoths to confuse the public. Let's look at the options and see where we can find a reference. Option 1 states promoting screen time in public schools while opting for a screen free education for their own children. This is correct. We can see this from the last 3 or 4 lines of the fourth paragraph. In Silicon Valley, time on screens is increasingly seen as unhealthy. Here, the popular elementary school is the local Waldorf school, which promises a back to nature, nearly screen free education. So, as wealthy kids are growing up with less screen time, poor kids are growing up with more. How comfortable someone is with human engagement could become a new class marker. So, this is where we get a valid answer, a valid reasoning for this phrase, confuse the public. So, one is a valid answer. Option two states pushing for greater privacy while working with advertisement support platforms to mine data. We have the mention of advertisement support platforms here in the second paragraph. And as studies show that time on these advertisement support platforms is unhealthy, it all starts to seem déclassé, like drinking soda or smoking cigarettes, which wealthy people do less than poor people. The wealthy people can afford to opt out of having their data and their attention sold as a product. But this does not give us any reasoning as to why Silicon Valley tech companies have tried to confuse the public. So while this is true according to the passage, this is not also true according to the passage. We can see there are assumptions here. Pushing for greater privacy while working with advertisement support platforms, no such reference has been made. So we can eliminate option 2. Option 3 states concealing the findings of psychologists and neuroscientists on screen time use from the public. This is also outside the premise. We can see here there are fleets of psychologists, neuroscientists on staff at big tech companies working to hook eyes and minds to the screen as fast as possible. There's absolutely no reference to concealing any of the findings by these people at all. So, this is also outside the premise. We can eliminate option 3. Option 4 states developing new work efficiency programs while lobbying for the right to disconnect bill. Again, there's no such reference. We can see here. There's a small movement to pass a right to disconnect bill, which would allow workers to turn their phones off. But for now, a worker can be punished for going offline. So there is no reference to developing new work efficiency programs while lobbying for. Not at all. So this also is outside the premise. We can eliminate option 4. Our answer is clearly option 1. The author is least likely to agree with the view that the increase in screen time is fueled by the fact that. So our answer must be something that is least likely to give us a reasoning for the increase in screen time as according to the information given in the passage. Let's check with the options. Option 1 states some workers face punitive action if they are not online. This is true. We can see this from the last paragraph. There is a small movement to pass a right to disconnect bill, which would allow workers to turn their phones off. But for now, a worker can be punished for going offline and not being available. This means that there would be this is something which is going to cause which will cause more screen time or increase in screen time. So the author is likely to agree with this. So 1 is not a valid answer. We can eliminate option 1. Option 2 states there is a growth in computer-based teaching in public schools. This we can see from the fourth paragraph. Tech companies worked hard to get public schools to buy into programs that required schools to have one laptop per student, arguing that it would better prepare children for their screen-based future. Skip a few lines further, we see this reference. So, as wealthy kids are growing up with less screen time, poor kids are growing up with more. That shows us that this option is also true according to the passage and is likely to be a cause for increasing screen time. So 2 also can be eliminated. Option 3 states, with falling costs, people are streaming more content on their devices. Now, while streaming more content on their devices probably is something that would increase screen time, but the passage does not make reference to streaming, video streaming, or any kind of streaming for that matter at all. So, this is something that we cannot say that the author is likely to agree with. Hence, we can actually mark this as a valid answer. Option 4 states, screens provide social contact in an increasingly isolating world. This is true. We have seen that also the reality that in our culture of increasing isolation, so increasingly isolating world in which so many of the traditional gathering places and social structures have disappeared, screens are filling a crucial void. Let us not get confused. This does not talk about human contact as another question did. This talks about social contact. We fill the void for social contact in an increasingly isolating world through screen time. So this is something that the author is likely to agree with, and this is something that would increase the use of screen time or increase in screen time. So 4 can be eliminated. Our answer thus is option 3. According to the passage, Said's book Orientalism, the reference to Orientalism is here. In order to get the reference, let's read one statement above or one statement behind it. Mary Louise Pratt's study of the genres and conventions of 18th and 19th century exploration narratives about South America and Africa. Example, the monarch of all I survey trope offered ways of thinking about travel writing as embedded within relations of power between metropole and periphery, as did Edward Said's theories of representation and cultural imperialism. Imperialism is a key word here. Particularly, Said's book, Orientalism, helped scholars understand ways in which representations of people in travel texts were intimately bound up with notions of self. In this case, that the Occident defined itself through essentialist, ethnocentric, and racist representations of the Orient. Occident and Orient, uncommon words. Orient representing the East, Occident representing the West. So let's check with the options. Option 1 states, explain the difference between the representation of people and the actual fact. Now, we do have the reference to representation of people, but there is no mentioned difference between representation of people and the actual fact, as in the representation of people was a distortion or was against fact or was outside of fact. No such reference is given. So we can eliminate option 1. Option 2 states, illustrated how narrow minded and racist Westerners were. Again, this is somewhat close, but it's a distortion of this line here, that the Occident defined itself through essentialist, ethnocentric, and racist representations of the Orient. The one word that clarifies it is representations. It's not that they were themselves racist, but their representations were racist, representations of the Orient. So narrow-minded is something outside, it's an exaggeration. Racist is a distortion. So this doesn't quite work. Moreover, this doesn't actually talk about the Orient or Orientalism. So that would be a key aspect here. So 2 can be eliminated. Option 3 states, demonstrated how cultural imperialism was used to justify colonial domination. This is perfect. We have cultural imperialism mentioned in the statement previous to the reference, and we see that theories of representation and cultural imperialism is mentioned here, where these works, such as, say, for example, Orientalism, help scholars understand ways in which representations of people in travel text were intimately bound up with notion of self in this case, that the Occident defined itself through essentialist, ethnocentric, racist representations, or we could say colonial domination. So this is correct. We can qualify 3 as a valid answer. Option 4 says, argued that cultural imperialism was more significant than colonial domination. Now we have cultural imperialism mentioned here. We have colonial domination suggested here. But we don't have the reference to any one being more significant than the other. They both existed. In fact, one was used to achieve another. So it's not that they were separate and one was more significant, one was less. They were equally significant because they were cause and effect of the same thing, same ideology. So 4 can be eliminated. Our answer is option 3. From the passage, we can infer that travel writing is most similar to. We can get a specific example of this in these last lines of the first paragraph. The completion of the first US transcontinental highway during the 1920s, for example, inaugurated a new genre of travel literature about the United States, the automotive or road narrative. Such narratives highlight the experiences of mostly male protagonists discovering themselves on their journeys, emphasizing the independence of road travel and the value of rural folk traditions. So, this gives us a good enough example. Let's check which of the given options matches with this. One says political journalism. Here, at least, we don't have the aspect of political, but we might, because this is just one example, we might have political aspects related, as we see here, might be related later on, but journalism, not exactly. These were basically experiences of the protagonists discovering themselves. These were not meant as journalism, these were not meant as shared news. So, one is irrelevant to the premise of the question. We can eliminate option 1. Option 2 states autobiographical writing. Yes, experiences of mostly male protagonists discovering themselves, which suggests that these were autobiographical. Self written biographies, journeys of self discovery, and such. So 2 is a valid answer. 3 says feminist writing. At least here we see in this example that it was mostly male protagonists. We have mention of feminist writing elsewhere, but that only goes to show that it's not necessarily uh, feminist writing. So it's not most similar to feminist writing. It could be uh, male protagonists writing about themselves as well. So 3 is not definitive. We can eliminate 3. Option 4 states historical fiction. Completely incorrect. 1, this is not historical. This is personal. Second, it's not fiction. It is real experiences. So there is no chance we can justify option 4. 4 is eliminated. Our answer is option 2. American travel literature of the 1920s. This is the reference here in the first paragraph. The completion of the first US transcontinental highway during the 1920s, for example, inaugurated a new genre of travel literature about the United States, the automotive or road narrative. Such narratives highlight the experiences of mostly male protagonists discovering themselves on their journeys, emphasizing the independence of road travel and the value of rural folk traditions. Let's check with the options. Option 1 states showed participation in local traditions. Incorrect. That's an assumption. The passage says that this showed emphasize the value of rural folk traditions, but does not say that there was actual participation in them. One could value local traditions without participating in them. So 1 is a baseless assumption. We can eliminate option 1. Option 2 states, develop the male protagonist's desire for independence. Again, this is slightly off. It didn't develop the male protagonist's desire for. So they had the independence of the road travel, but their desire for independence is something which is not directly mentioned. And then again, it did not develop the male protagonist's desire for independence. It suggested, emphasized, it showcased the male protagonist's desire for independence, if at all there was such a desire. It just says independence of the of road travel here. So yet again, 2 is a distortion. We can eliminate 2. Option 3 states, celebrated the freedom that travel gives. Perfect, perfect option. Emphasize the independence of road travel or celebrated the freedom that travel gives. The same in essence, the same in meaning. 3 can be qualified as a valid answer. Option 4 says, presented travelers' discovery of their identity as different from others. So, male protagonists discovering themselves, yes, but then other different from others? What others? No others have been mentioned here. There's no such reference made at all. So, we can eliminate option 4. Our answer is option 3. From the passage, we can infer that feminist scholars' understanding of the experiences of Victorian women travelers is influenced by all of the following, except scholar says. The references here in the third paragraph, we can see the reference from this line. Studies of Victorian women who were professional travel writers, tourists, wives of colonial administrators, and other mostly elite women who wrote narratives about their experiences abroad during the 19th century have been particularly revealing. The factors affecting the understanding of the experience of these women travelers, are mentioned after this. Let's go directly to the options. Option 1 states, perspective that they bring to their research. This is almost a direct reference. From a liberal feminist perspective, travel presented. So this is definitely true in the given context. So 1 can be eliminated. Option 2 says, knowledge of class tensions in Victorian society. This is incorrect. We can see class mentioned here, but in this line, there isn't any class tensions at all discussed. We see here, narrated their travel experiences, emphasizing women's sense of themselves as women in new locations, but only as they work through their ties to nation, class, whiteness, and colonial and imperial power structures. So we don't see any indication of these class tensions at all existing, and that and hence that these scholars had any knowledge of such class tensions. So 2 cannot be inferred from the passage. We can qualify 2 as a valid answer. Option 3 states awareness of the ways in which identity is formed. This is perfect. We can see it, we can infer it from here. Many studies from the 1970s onward demonstrated the ways in which women's gendered identities were negotiated differently at home and than they were away. So yet again, this is true in the given context. So we can eliminate 3. Option 4 states awareness of gender issues in Victorian society. We have just now seen the reference to this. We are talking about demonstrated the ways in which women's gendered identities were negotiated differently at home than they were away, thereby showing women's self-development through travel. So again, this is also true. We can eliminate option 4. Hence, our answer is option 2. From the passage, it can be inferred that scholars argue that Victorian women experience self development through their travels because the reference is still in the third paragraph. This is a reference close to one which we have already seen. Let's check with the answer options. 1 states they were on a quest to discover their diverse identities. This is incorrect. Diverse identities, as in diversity of identities, is not mentioned in the passage. It is stated here that many studies from 1970s onward demonstrated the ways in which women's gendered identities were negotiated. Here we see that women's identities is in question, not their quest for diverse identities. So one is not the answer. We can eliminate one. Option two says their identity was redefined when they were away from home. This is this is absolutely true. We can infer this from the very same line. Many studies from the 1970s onward demonstrated the ways in which women's gendered identities were negotiated differently at home than they were away, thereby showing women's self development through travel. We see women experience self development through their travels. This is a direct reference, and here we get the direct reference to 2, which makes 2 a valid answer. So we can qualify option 2. Option 3 states they developed a feminist perspective of the world. All right, this is true according to the passage. So this does not give us the answer. Does this show why they experience self development? It doesn't. So while this is true according to the passage, it is irrelevant to the premise of the question. We can eliminate option 3. Option 4 states they were from the progressive middle and upper classes of society. Again, this is also true for middle and upper class Victorian women, but this also does not give us the answer why they experienced self development. So, just like option 3, we can eliminate option 4. Thus, our answer is option 2. Which one of the following, if true, would be an accurate inference from the first sentence of the passage? The first sentence is exceedingly simple. I have been following the economic crisis for more than 2 years now. What a pretty little Betsy. Let's check with the options. Option 1 states the author is preoccupied with the economic crisis because he is being followed. There's absolutely no reference to he is being followed anywhere in the passage, much less in the first statement, first sentence. So 1 is clearly wrong, we can eliminate it. Option 2 states the author's preoccupation with the economic crisis is not less than 2 years old. Absolutely, he says it directly. I've been following the economic crisis for more than 2 years now. So this preoccupation has gone on for at least more than 2 years. 2 is a valid answer. We can qualify 2. 3 states the economic crisis outlasted the author's preoccupation with it. Wrong. It is stated that by the author that he or she has been following the economic crisis for more than 2 years now. So even at the present, the author has been following it. So we cannot infer 3. 3 can be eliminated. Option 4 states the author has witnessed many economic crises by traveling a lot for 2 years. First, crises, plural, no reference. Second, traveling a lot for the last 2 years or for 2 years. Again, no reference. So we can eliminate option 4. The answer is clearly option 2. According to the passage, the author is likely to be supportive of which one of the following programs? Option 1 states an educational curriculum that promotes developing financial literacy in the masses. This is perfect. We have seen the reference. Many bright, literate people have no idea about all sorts of economic basics of a type that financial insiders take as elementary facts of how the world works. So, an educational curriculum that promotes development of financial literacy in the masses would be something that the author would support. So 1 is a valid answer. Option 2 states an educational curriculum that promotes economic research. Now this is close but not exactly. We have financial literacy. Economic basics are mentioned. That won't need research. What it needs is basic literacy of economic terms, let's say. So 2 is inferior as compared to 1. It can be eliminated. Option 3 states the complete nationalization of all financial institutions. We have financial institutions or one financial institute mentioned here, the British Bank Northern Rock, Blue. So that means that we have just one reference, not enough support. And then again, nationalization has not been mentioned. So 3 is outside the premise. We cannot say anything certainly about 3. So 3 can be eliminated. Option 4 states economic policies that are more sensitively calibrated to the fluctuations of the market. Now, while we do have some mention of economic policies, fluctuations of the market and sensitivity towards them have again not been discussed. So we can eliminate option 4. The answer is option 1. Which one of the following, if false, could be seen as supporting the author's claim? This oddball question has featured in each of the slots of the 2020 CAT at least once. So to understand the question, whichever option is weakening of the argument given in the passage would be a perfect answer to this, because if it were false, then it would be seen as supporting of the author's claims. If an option is instead strengthening of the argument given in the passage, then if made false, it would go against the passage. So let's check with the options. 1 states the economic crisis was not a failure of collective action to rectify economic problems. This is definitely incorrect according to the passage. This goes against the passage. We see here it is stated that I was both right and too late because all the groundwork for the crisis had already been done. Though the sluggishness of the world's governments in not preparing for the great unraveling of autumn 2008 was then and still stupefying. So we find that it was a failure of collective action to rectify the economic crisis or the economic problem that led to the crisis. So this is against the passage, which means if it were false, then we would get a statement which was supporting the author's claims. So 1 can be qualified as a valid answer. 2 states the global economic crisis lasted for more than 2 years. Direct reference, I have been following the economic crisis for more than 2 years now. So this is the same as the passage. This is in agreement with the passage. Hence, as we have discussed, we can eliminate option 2. Option 3 states the huge gap between science and arts has steadily narrowed over time. This we can infer from these lines, but I am not sure the idea of a huge gap between science and the arts is as true as it was half a century ago. It's certainly true, for instance, that a general reader who wants to pick up an education in the fundamentals of science will find it easier than ever before. It seems to me that there is a much bigger gap between the world of finance and that of the general public, and that there is no need, and there is a need to narrow that gap. So this is also inferable, hence we can eliminate option 3. Option 4 states most people are yet to gain any real understanding of the workings of the financial world. This we can see from this line. Many bright, literate people have no idea about all sorts of economic basics of a type that financial insiders take as elementary facts of how the world works. So yet again, we can eliminate option 4. Our answer is option 1. Which one of the following best captures the main argument of the last paragraph of the passage? The reference to this is quite simple. The last paragraph is short enough. We can read it. That's one of the strangest ironies of this story. After decades in which the ideology of the Western world was personally and economically individualistic, we've suddenly been hit by a crisis which shows in the starkest terms that whether we like it or not, and there are large parts of it that you would have to be crazy to like, we are all in this together. The aftermath of the crisis is going to dominate the economics and politics of our societies for at least a decade to come and perhaps longer. So basically, the idea of or the ideology of individualism, being individualistic personally and economically, this has been this has been defeated. And we have seen that after all, we are all in this together. So let's check with the options. Option 1 states the aftermath of the crisis will strengthen the central ideology of individualism in the Western world. This is incorrect. The aftermath of the crisis will rather weaken the central ideology of individualism. Individualism has failed, it is not the system. We are all in this together. So 1 is incorrect. 2 states the ideology of individualism must be set aside in order to deal with the crisis. This is perfect. I, Ideology of individualism is incorrect, didn't work, it has failed, so it must be set aside to deal with the crisis. So 2 is a valid answer. Option 3 states in the decades to come, other ideologies will emerge in the aftermath of the crisis. We don't have any reference to other ideologies. One ideology has failed, and so it must be set aside. That's the reference. So 3 is outside the premise, 3 can be eliminated. Option 4 states whoever you are, you would be crazy to think that there is no crisis. Nobody has contested that there is no crisis. What is mentioned about being crazy is here. Whether you like it or not, and there are large parts of it that you would have to be crazy to like, we are all in this together. So this is clearly a distortion. We can summarily eliminate option 4. Our answer, hence, is option 2. All of the following, if true, could be seen as supporting the arguments in the passage, except the only difficulty with this question is that the references are spread a little far apart in the passage. In any case, let's check with the options. Option 1 states the difficulty with understanding financial matters is that they have become so arcane. Now, while this is not directly mentioned in the passage, it can be inferred. We can see here that the difficulty of understanding the world of finance is mentioned. It seems to me that there is a much bigger gap between the world of finance and that of the general public, and that there is need to narrow that gap. If the financial industry is not to be a kind of priesthood administering to its own mysteries and feared and resented by the rest of us. So, in these words, we can see that it has become arcane is referenced. So, this is true. This is supported by the passage. Hence, 1 can be eliminated. Option 2 states the story of the economic crisis is also one about international relations, global financial security, and mass psychology. Ho hum. So, to check all of these options, the economic crisis is, of course, introduced in the very beginning. We see international relations mentioned here because all the groundwork for the crisis had already been done through, though the sluggishness of the world's governments is not preparing for the great unraveling of autumn 2008 was then and still stupefying. Global financial security can be seen here. If our laws are not extended to control the new kinds of super powerful, super complex, and potentially super risky investment vehicles, they will one day cause a financial disaster of global systemic proportions. And mass psychology, this we can see here. It is an absolutely amazing story full of human interest and drama, one whose byways of mathematics, economics, and psychology are both central to the story of the last decades and mysteriously unknown to the general public. So, finally, in all of this, we can qualify option 2 as being true, supported by the passage, hence, 2 also is eliminated. Option 3 states the failure of economic systems does not necessarily mean the failure of their ideologies. Now, this here is something which is not mentioned in the passage because we are not talking about the failure of the economic systems and the failure of their ideologies separately. This we can see from the second paragraph. We see here that's one of the strangest ironies of this story. After decades in which the ideology of the Western world was personally and economically individualistic, we have suddenly been hit by a crisis which shows in the starkest terms that whether we like it or not, there are large parts. Skip this line. We are all in this together. So it's not that we have a distinction between the failure of an economic system and the failure of their ideologies. The ideology has been proven wrong. So we can see how this is not exactly what the passage states. Hence, 3 is a valid answer. Option 4 states economic crisis could be averted by changing prevailing ideologies and beliefs. We have already seen the reference to this. If our laws are not extended to control the new kinds of super powerful, super complex, and potentially super risky investment vehicles, they will one day cause a financial disaster of global systemic proportions. Now, in stating this, that if these laws are not extended to control these issues, then one day they will cause a financial disaster. We can invert this and say economic crisis could be averted by changing ideologies and beliefs. So this is also true, hence 4 can be eliminated. Our answer is option 3. Statement 1 says, it advocated a conservative approach to antitrust enforcement that espouses faith in efficient markets and voiced suspicion regarding the merits of judicial intervention to correct anti competitive practices. Statement 2 says many industries have consistently gained market share, the lion's share, without any official concern. The most successful technology companies have grown into veritable titans on the premise that they advance public interest. 3 states that the new anti competitive risks posed by tech giants like Google, Facebook, and Amazon necessitate new legal solutions could be attributed to the dearth of enforcement actions against monopolies and the few cases challenging mergers in the USA. And 4 states the criterion of consumer welfare standard and the principle that antitrust law should serve consumer interests and that it should protect competition rather than individual competitors was an antitrust law introduced by and named after the Chicago School. So, quite a difficult question, a lot of language, a lot of jargon, but we can get through this with a few connections forming. We find that overall, the passage is about antitrust law and its enforcement. We also see that antitrust law, at least a particular one, is introduced in Statement 4. The criterion of consumer welfare standard and the principle that antitrust law should serve consumer interest and that it should protect competition rather than individual competitors was an antitrust law introduced by and named after the Chicago School. So when we say that antitrust law introduced by and named after, we most probably is talking about the anti-competitive law or the antitrust law mentioned in the rest of the statements. So by what it looks like now, 4 might be our opening statement. After that, we get a connection, a strong connection in 1, because 4 mentions the antitrust law introduced by and named after the Chicago School. 1 then continues by saying it advocated a conservative approach to antitrust enforcement. So, what we are talking about is basically an implementation of antitrust enforcement. Where does that come from? It comes from antitrust law introduced by the Chicago School. So 4 and 1 seem to connect. Otherwise, we would have one connecting with 2 or one connecting with 3, but both could not work because in 2, we have the subject. Many industries have consistently gained market share, and it ends with on the premise that they advance public interest. Neither could public interest advocate a conservative approach, nor could many industries be referred to as it. So 2 1 doesn't connect. 3 1 also doesn't connect because that the new anti competitive risks posed by tech giants like Google, Facebook, etc. New anti competitive risk also would not advocate a conservative approach, as we see here. And then again, towards the end of this, it is stated the dearth of could be attributed to the dearth of enforcement actions against monopolies and the few cases challenging mergers in the USA. Again, enforcement actions against monopolies, few cases challenging mergers, those cannot be referred to as it. If we do say that new anti-competitive risks, again it cannot be uh, denoted by it because all of these are plural. So we find that one could only connect with 4. So we get a pair in 4 1. We can clear out these statements as well. Finally, if you look at 2 and 3, we find that there is a connection between 2 and 3 because they speak of anti competitive practices, which is, as we can see, introduced in statement 1. If we look at statement 2, we find it says, many industries have consistently gained market share, the lion's share, without any official concern. The most successful technology companies have grown into veritable titans on the premise that they advance public interest. And then in 3, we have that the new anti competitive risks posed by tech giants like Google, Facebook, and Amazon. We see that the titans mentioned in 2 are exemplified in tech giants like Google, Facebook, and Amazon, necessitate new legal solutions could be attributed to the dearth of enforcement actions against monopolies and the few cases challenging mergers in the USA. So this we can see that this also comes from 2 because 2 talks about basically what we have in the aspect of anti-competitive practices. We have many industries consistently gaining market share without any official concern. The most successful technology companies have grown into veritable titans. The premise that they advance public interest, but in reality, new legal solutions could be attributed to the dearth of enforcement actions against monopolies and the few cases challenging mergers in the USA. So while we have a causality relation in 2 and 3. 2 mentions something, it makes an assertion. 3 gives us the consequence of that. So we get another pair in 2 and 3. Once we have this, we have to now put 4 1 and 2 3 into order. We realize that 1 talks about, if we see near the end of the statement, 1 talks about anti competitive practices. Actually, the merits of judicial intervention to correct anti competitive practices, and this was viewed with suspicion after the Chicago School or after the tenets, the postulates of the Chicago School. So we see that this aspect is introduced in 1 because before that we have 4 and 4 didn't have anti-competitive practices. It did mention antitrust law, but it didn't have anti-competitive practices. The practices are introduced in 1. We have anti-competitive risks mentioned in 3. So from anti-competitive practices, we get an example of such practices. Many industries have consistently gained market share, the lion's share, without any official concern. The most successful technology companies have grown into veritable titans. So, one cheat connection that we do have is veritable titans, where we see tech giants like Google, Facebook, and Amazon. We are talking about technology companies growing into veritable titans. So, we find that there is a connection between 1 and 2. And then, of course, there's a connection between 2 and 3. That's something we worked out, and in which case 4 would actually mean that we introduce the Chicago School of Antitrust Law in 4, which means that the pair 4-1 would come first and 2-3 would come later. And thus we have the sequence done. So 4 is our opening statement. Then we have 1 as our second statement. Then comes 2 as the third statement. And finally, we have 3 as the fourth statement. So we get our final sequence as 4-1-2-3. That is our answer. Statement 1 says, complex computational elements of the CNS are organized according to a nested hierarchic criterion. The organization is not permanent and can change dynamically from moment to moment as they carry out a computational task. Statement 2 says, echolocation in bats exemplifies adaptation produced by natural selection. A function not produced by natural selection for its current use is exaptation. Feathers might have originally arisen in the context of selection for insulation. 3 states, from a structural standpoint, consistent with exaptation, the living organism is organized as a complex of Russian matryoshka dolls. Smaller structures are contained within larger ones in multiple layers. And 4 states, the exaptation concept and the Russian doll organization concept of living beings deduced from studies on evolution of the various apparatuses in mammals can be applied for the most complex human organ, the central nervous system, CNS. Now, this is a very difficult question, not because it is difficult, but it is tricky. What is tricky here is the aspect of the Russian doll, as mentioned in 4, and then the specific mention of, in quotations, the Russian matryoshka dolls in 3. Let's hold on to that thought. First, let's check with statement 2. Echolocation in bats exemplifies adaptation produced by natural selection. So this here is an example of adaptation. But the key aspect of the passage, the central idea of the passage of these lines, is something else. A function not produced by natural selection for its current use is exaptation. Feathers might have originally arisen in the context of selection for insulation. So feathers were originally probably developed in order to have insulation rather than flight. We realize that the rest of the statements are about exaptation, and this statement, it introduces exaptation, as we see here. So we have a sense that what looks like 2 might be our opening statement. So we can clear out 2. Next, we come to 3 and 4. Here, things get really complex. If we look at the part in quotations, Russian matryoshka dolls, and the Russian doll organization mentioned in 4, it clearly seems like the order for these 2 statements would be 3, 4. But that is not so. In fact, it would not be very uh, it would not be an off statement or an exaggeration to say that many people would actually get this wrong at this very point. We could see that in statement 1, we have the mention of CNS. CNS is introduced in 4. So what we need is for 1 to follow 4 at least. Between 3 and 4, we'll have to analyze. 3 states, from a structural standpoint consistent with exaptation, the living organism is organized as a complex of Russian matryoshka dolls. Smaller structures are contained within larger ones in multiple layers. And 4 says the exaptation concept. Here we see, because of the subject, what it looks like initially is that because of the Russian matryoshka dolls, it seems like the order would be 3 4, but actually the order would be 4 3. And that is because 2 speaks about exaptation. 4 then connects with that, stating the exaptation concept. I mean, we could very well put 3 after 2 from a structural standpoint consistent with exaptation. So that would change the argument. It would change the argument from exaptation to the organization of the living organism from a structural standpoint. In that case, 4 would return back to the exaptation concept, which doesn't work. Moreover, we can see that the aspect of organization concept of living beings deduced from studies on evolution, etc., is actually introduced here in 4. So 4 cannot follow 3, it has to precede 3. Let's try that and see if we can form some more connections. So we have a pair forming in 4 3. So between 2 and 4, we seem to have a connection in exaptation. Exaptation, the exaptation concept. So no problems there. 4 and 3 have a certain order. The exaptation concept and the Russian doll organization concept of living beings deduced from study on evolution of the various apparatuses in mammals can be applied for the most complex human organ, the central nervous system, or CNS. From a structural standpoint, consistent with exaptation, the living organism is organized as a complex of Russian matryoshka dolls. Smaller structures are contained within larger ones in multiple layers. So between these two, it makes some sense. 4 and 3 can come in that order, 4 and 3. What about 1? Between 3 and 1, we realize there again is a connection because 1 cannot immediately follow 4. So what we need is basically 1 to follow the pair 4 and 3. 1 says, complex computational elements of the CNS are organized according to a nested hierarchical criterion. And nested is where it connects with 3 in the aspect of the Russian matryoshka dolls. Because matryoshka dolls are one of the best examples of nested hierarchies or nested structures. Nested basically means similar similar structures or symmetrical structures nestled one within the other, smaller and smaller things of the same shape. So matryoshka dolls are the Russian women, where there are dolls of increasingly smaller sizes, and they are hidden inside each doll of the uh, next size or the next smaller size. So there we see the connection. Nested hierarchic criterion, the organization is not permanent and can change dynamically from moment to moment as they carry out a computational task. So we have our doubts clarified. We cannot have we cannot have 1 following 2, as in we cannot have 1 here, because in that case 1 would precede 4, and that cannot happen. By the aspect of CNS, we have to have 1 following 4. Then we cannot have 1 in between 4 and 3 here, because in that case the aspect of change of the computational task and the organization of the CNS does not then connect with 3. 3 then seems abrupt. So we see that 1 cannot come here. in which case we realize that one has to be the last statement. So thus we get the sequence as following. We have at first the opening statement, which is 2. Then comes the pair 4 3, making 4 our second statement and 3 our third statement. And finally, we have statement 1 as our closing statement, the final, the fourth statement. So we get the final answer sequence as 2 4 3 1. The passage states, the rural-urban continuum and the heterogeneity of urban settings pose an obvious challenge to identifying urban areas and measuring urbanization rates in a consistent way within and across countries. Difficult language, but what it's trying to say is that these things, the rural urban continuum and the heterogeneity of urban settings, the the varied nature, diverse nature of urban settings pose an obvious challenge to identifying urban areas and measuring urbanization rates in a consistent way within and across countries. An objective methodology for distinguishing between urban and rural areas that is based on one or two metrics with fixed thresholds may not adequately capture the wide diversity of places. A richer combination of criteria would better describe the multifaceted nature of a city's functions and its environment. But the joint interpretation of these criteria may require an element of human judgment. So it might require human judgment to qualify to understand, to process such diversity, because which makes identifying urban areas or differentiating them from rural areas difficult. So let's check with the options. Option 1 states, with the diversity of urban landscapes, measurable criteria for defining urban areas may need to be supplemented with human judgment. This is okay. This is not a bad answer. It's decent enough. There is one thing missing. We have rural urban continuum, heterogeneity, etc. So, heterogeneity is mentioned as diversity of urban landscapes. Not a problem. So, the first part is covered. Objective methodology for distinguishing between urban and rural areas based on one or two metrics with fixed thresholds may not adequately capture the wide diversity of places. A richer combination of criteria would better describe the multifaceted nature. So we find in all of this that measurable criteria connects with objective methodology, or we have a combination, not a combination of criteria, but then the criteria for distinguishing urban and rural areas might not be enough, might not be adequate, might need to be supplemented, supported with human judgment, may require an element of human judgment. So this is almost perfect, but it's limited in one aspect. It misses out one key aspect, which is a richer combination of criteria would better describe the multifaceted nature of a city's function and its environment, but the joint interpretation, so measurable criteria, might have taken richer combination. While richer combination is put under less priority, so because of the word but, so we might skip this. So this seems like an okay answer, but we might have the phrase richer combination of criteria mentioned here. Here we are only talking about measurable criteria, so it's not the same thing. Let's see if we can find a better option. Option 2 states, current methodologies used to define urban and rural areas are no longer relevant to our being able to study trends in urbanization. This is not only limited as compared to option 1, this is also an exaggeration. The passage states they might not be adequate. These metrics or these methodology might not be adequate to capture the wide diversity. But here it says no longer relevant. They're not irrelevant, they might be inadequate to cover the diversity. They're not completely out of whack. So this is going a little too far. This is uncalled for. Two can be eliminated. Option 3 states, The difficulty of accurately identifying urban areas means that we need to create a rich combination of criteria that can be applied to all urban areas. Again, this is okay, but it's limited as compared to one. We have difficulty of accurately identifying urban areas means we need to create a rich combination of criteria. So rich combination of criteria is mentioned that can be applied to all urban areas. But we have about two aspects missing here. One is there's no direct mention of the aspect of diversity, and diversity is the reason why accurate identification of urban areas might be difficult. So that is a key aspect that is missed out. And this option then completely omits the mention of human judgment. Human judgment is again a very important aspect here. So this cannot be taken, this cannot be accepted. We have to eliminate option 3. Option 4 states distinguishable distinguishing between urban and rural areas might call for some judgment on the objective methodology being used to define a city's functions. This is a distortion. Distinguishing between urban and rural areas might call for some judgment on the objective methodology. No, it it would have the objective methodology. What it would require is human judgment. See, the aspect of judgment has completely, the meaning, the essence of judgment has completely been changed here. Here in the passage we are talking about human judgment is human discretion, human understanding of the diversity of various places, of various cities and urban areas. So we could analyze urban areas individually. Here judgment means basically a judgment, a decision. What comes from what connects to the word judgmental, to pass judgment on the objective methodology. This is clearly a distortion. So we cannot accept 4. We have to eliminate this option as well. Hence we see that while one was slightly limited, it is the only possible summary over here. Rest of the options, they are inadequate in one way or the other. So one can be qualified. Our final answer is option 1. Statement 1 says, the logic of displaying one's inner qualities through outward appearance was based on a distinction between being a woman and being feminine. Statement 2 says, appearance became a signifier of conduct. To look was to be, and conformity to the feminine ideal was measured by how well women could use the tool of the fashion and beauty industries. Statement 3 says, the makeover centric media sets out subtly and not so subtly good and bad ways to be a woman, layering these over inequalities of race and class. 4 states, the denigration of working class women and women of color often centers on the perceived failure to embody feminine beauty. And 5 says, woman was considered a biological category, but femininity was a process by which women became specific kinds of women. So we find that most of the ideas do have some crossovers, but we can still start eliminating the statements. One says, logic of displaying one's inner qualities through outward appearance was based on a distinction between being a woman and being feminine. We can see that this easily connects with 5. Woman was considered a biological category, but femininity was a process by which women became specific kinds of women. So we can see that 1 and 5 are connected. So we can eliminate 1 and 5. Let's clear them out as well. In 2, we have the aspect of appearance becoming a signifier of conduct. To look was to be, and conformity to the feminine ideal was measured by how well women could use the tool of the fashion and beauty industries. So this also connects with 5. femininity was a process, and how good women looked and how feminine they looked, that would be to their credit. It would be a measure of their appearance as such. So we can also eliminate option 2, statement 2. Statement 3 says the makeover centric media sets out, subtly and not so subtly, good and bad ways to be a woman, layering these over inequalities of race and class. Now, this seems like it's outside of the premise slightly, because one, it talks about media. The makeover centric media sets out subtly and not so subtly good and bad ways to be a woman. We have the aspect of being a woman, being a specific kind of woman in statement 5, let's say here. But this here is something different. We are talking about the media setting out versions of, say, good or bad women, or good or bad ways to be a woman. To be a woman, it doesn't necessarily talk uh, about appearance. It doesn't necessarily talk about the notion of women as well. It is something relating to the media, and media as such we don't have any other mention of. Layering these over inequalities of race and class, we can see from statement 4. 4 does have a reference to inequalities of race and class, but the denigration of working class women and women of color, mind you, colored women is women of different ethnicities, different races, especially usually colored. The word colored is used for African American people. It's not a very polite word, mind you. So don't use it in proper conversation. Often centers on their perceived failure to embody feminine beauty. So we see that while this also talks about feminine beauty, this talks about working class women and women of color, but that doesn't directly connect with what we have in 3 as inequalities of race and gender. It's not inequalities of race and gender, it is rather the denigration of the race and gender of women in the in view of the aspect of appearance and feminine beauty and such. So we realize that 3 is sufficiently different from the other statements. So 4 can be eliminated. We can qualify 3 as an odd statement. Hence, our answer is option 3 or 3. Brown et al. 2001 suggests that metabolic theory may provide a conceptual foundation for much of ecology, just as genetic theory provides a foundation for much of evolutionary biology. One of the successes of genetic theory is the diversity of theoretical approaches and models that have been developed and applied. A Web of Science version 5.9, Thomson Reuters, search on genetic plus theor plus evolve identifies more than 12,000 publications between 2005 and 2012. Considering only the 10 most cited papers within this 12,000 publication set, genetic theory can be seen to focus on genome dynamics, phylogenetic inference, game theory, and the regulation of gene expression. There is no one there's no one fundamental genetic equation, but rather a wide array of genetic models ranging from simple to complex, with differing inputs and outputs and divergent areas of application, loosely connected to each other through the shared conceptual foundation of heritable variation. Quite a mouthful this passage is, but we have one or two key aspects. The most important aspect here is there is a connection between metabolic theory and genetic theory. What metabolic theory is to ecology, genetic theory is to evolutionary biology. That's the key aspect. So let's check with the options. Option 1 states genetic theory has evolved to spawn a wide range of theoretical models and applications, but metabolic theory need not evolve in a similar manner in the field of ecology. We see that metabolic theory need not evolve in a similar manner is definitely an assumption. There is no reference like this that one must evolve, the other must not, the other does not have to. There's no such reference. So this is outside the premise. We can eliminate option 1. Option 2 states genetic theory provides an example of how a range of theoretical approaches and applications can make a theory successful. This might be true of genetic theory, but this option omits metabolic theory. So we don't even have to consider the meaning of what is mentioned. We can directly eliminate 2. Option 3 states genetic theory has a wide range of theoretical approaches and applications, and metabolic theory must have the same in the field of ecology. Here also we see that this would otherwise be okay, but metabolic theory must have the same in the field of ecology. No, metabolic theory has the same, may provide even a conceptual foundation of much of ecology. It must have the same in the field of ecology is an exaggeration, cannot be said. So 3 can be eliminated. Option 4 states genetic theory has a wide range of theoretical approaches and applications and is foundational to evolutionary biology, and metabolic theory has the potential to do so, to do the same for ecology. This is perfect. We see genetic theory is the basis for the foundation of evolutionary biology. We have genetic theory has one of the successes of the genetic theory is the diversity of theoretical approaches and models that have been developed. Then we have a discussion of these. So we can qualify both these parts. Genetic theory has a wide range of theoretical approaches and applications and is the foundation of evolutionary biology. And then we have metabolic theory has the potential to do the same for ecology. Notice the words the potential. So, metabolic theory may provide a conceptual foundation for much of ecology, just as similar to genetic theory. So, we find that this very closely reflects the passage, at least the key area of the passage, the key part, the relevant part of the passage. So, 4 is a valid summary. Our answer is option 4. Statement 1 says machine learning models are prone to learning human like biases from the training data that feeds these algorithms. 2 states hate speech detection is part of the ongoing effort against oppressive and abusive language on social media. 3 states the current automatic detection models miss out on something vital context. 4 states it uses complex algorithms to flag racist or violent speech faster and better than human beings alone. And then finally, 5 says, for instance, algorithms struggle to determine if group identifiers like gay or black are used in offensive or prejudiced ways because they are trained on imbalanced data sets with unusually high rates of hate speech. So here it might look like a scary question, but actually it's quite straightforward. Let's jump right to the odd statement. 3 is the odd statement. Why? Because it says the current automatic detection models miss out on something vital, context. And while context is not directly mentioned anywhere else in the passage, it is something which can be inferred. We can see from statement 1 machine learning models. So this is about machine learning, and models of machine learning are prone to learning human like biases from the training data that feeds these algorithms. So human like biases are what eventually will go into context. In two, we have hate speech detection is a part of the ongoing effort against oppressive and abusive language on social media. Again, this talks about in a generalization context. Then we have four, which states it uses complex algorithms to flag racist or violent speech faster and better than human beings alone. So, racist or violent speech, again, speech not just by the meaning of it, but by the context of it. So, racism or violence in speech. And we have a very strong reference to this, which connects the entire given thread to the aspect of context in C. In three is in five. For instance, algorithms struggle to determine if group identifiers like gay or black are used in offensive or prejudiced ways because they are trained on imbalanced data sets with unusually high rates of hate speech. So we see that algorithms struggle to determine, yes, but this doesn't say that they miss out. And it is because of something else. They have the ability to identify these instances of offensive or prejudiced language, but because they are trained on imbalanced data sets with unusually high rates of hate speech, they tend to sometimes miss out. But 3 says outright that the current automatic detection models miss out on something vital, context, while no other statement makes this reference. In fact, most other statements suggest that the machine language learning or machine learning is quite prone to picking up the context by itself. So we find that we can eliminate statements 1, 2, 4, and 5. We can qualify 3 as as the odd statement. So our final answer is 3. The passage states aesthetic political representation urges us to realize that the representative has autonomy with regard to the people represented, but autonomy then is not an excuse to abandon one's responsibility. Aesthetic autonomy requires cultivation of disinterestedness on the part of actors, which is not indifference. To have disinterestedness, that is, to have comportment towards the beautiful that is devoid of all ulterior references to use, requires a kind of aesthetic commitment. It is the liberation of ourselves for the release of what has proper worth only in itself. Now, don't be scared by this immensely uh, difficult and verbose passage. It's not long, but it's excessively wordy. It barely makes sense. But we actually need to analyze only one small part of the passage, and that is this one, the part which says aesthetic autonomy requires cultivation of disinterestedness. Let's hold that thought and jump to the options. Option 1 states aesthetic political representation advocates autonomy. This is true. We can see from the first two lines. For the representatives, manifested through disinterestedness, which itself is different from indifference. We can also see which is not indifference. So the last part is confirmed, and the representative has autonomy. So the first part is confirmed. What we need to check here again is a small part, which is manifested through disinterestedness. Autonomy manifested through disinterestedness. Hold that thought again, and let's move a little further. 2 says disinterestedness as distinct from indifference and so on, not required. The subject we have is aesthetic political representation, not disinterestedness. We can see from the second statement that disinterestedness is the object of the statement, not the subject. This here option changes that. It brings disinterestedness to the forefront, making it the subject. So clearly we can eliminate option 2. Option 3 states disinterestedness is different from indifference as the former means non subjective. Again, stop there. No need to read any further. Same problem as option 2. Disinterestedness is the subject here, which is a distortion of the passage, the premise of the passage. So we can eliminate option 3. Option 4 states aesthetic political representation advocates autonomy for the representatives, drawing from disinterestedness, which itself is different from indifference. Now, at this point, if you compare the first and the fourth option, you'll realize that large parts of it are the same. What we are looking for, autonomy, and here is the different part. Drawing from disinterestedness. Here we have manifested through, here we have drawing from. The rest of the statement for the two options are the same. So now if we check with this part, this is where we had stopped in the beginning, saying that we'll need to analyze this part. We'll realize that aesthetic autonomy requires cultivation of disinterestedness. So we are not talking about manifestation. Manifestation is to make something real, to manifest, to show, to portray, to bring forward. Doesn't connect here. Here we are talking about cultivation of. Cultivation of means an understanding of, means a practice of disinterestedness, which means autonomy drawing from disinterestedness is perfect. So by comparison, 1 is an inferior option. We can eliminate option 1. 4 is just right. So we can qualify 4. Our final answer is option 4. Statement 1 says, each one personified a different aspect of good fortune. Statement 2 says, the others were versions of popular Buddhist gods, Hindu gods, and Taoist gods. 3 says, 7 popular Japanese deities, the Shichifukujin, were considered to bring good luck and happiness. And 4 says, although they were included in the Shinto pantheon, only 2 of them, Daikoku and Ebisu, were indigenous Japanese gods. So this is rather straightforward. We can do this, or we can do this entirely, not almost entirely, entirely by drawing connections. We see that the introductory statement is 3. 7 popular Japanese deities, the Shichifukujin, were considered to bring good luck and happiness. By good luck and happiness, we can connect this with 1. So 1 says each one personified a different aspect of good fortune. So 7 popular Japanese deities bringing good luck, each one personifying a different aspect of good fortune or good luck. So first off, we have a pair in 3-1. Next up, we can see that 4 continues this argument further. It says, although they were included in the Shinto pantheon, only 2 of them, now 2 out of 7, Daikoku and Ebisu, were indigenous Japanese gods. And this then connects with 2, which says the others. So only 2 of them, and then the others, were versions of popular Buddhist gods, Hindu gods, and Taoist gods. So we see clearly there is a pair in 4 and 2. Once we have seen this, we need to just find out which order comes where. Would 3-1 come first or 4-2 come first? In 4, we see that there is reference to the gods mentioned in 3 in they were included. So we realize that 4-2 would come after 3-1, which means that our sequence becomes, first we have the pair 3-1. That means 3 is our opening statement, 1 is the second statement. Then we have the pair 4-2, which means 4 comes in as our third statement, and then 2 comes in as our fourth and final statement. So we get our final answer sequence as 3142.